welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely lovely, warm hug of a book. I am so excited to talk about it. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely, and I love that, a warm hug of a book. My name is Laura Buchwald. My book is The Book of Reservations, and it is the second in my Ghost Table trilogy. It's about a woman who owns a restaurant in Lower Manhattan at the turn of the millennium and who can communicate with spirits. And this gets in the way both at work and at home, but she is, for better or for worse, stuck with this ability throughout the book.
It's such a fascinating treatment of both this sort of medium type power that she has and of grief and how that affects our relationships and our professional and personal lives. Before we get to the book itself, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer and what
Sure.
brought you here.
Well, I've been writing my whole life and dabbling in fiction since I could hold a pen, or a pencil, I guess, at that time. And I started the first book in this trilogy is The Coat Check Girl. I actually started that book back in 2007, inspired by a restaurant where I spent some time in Lower Manhattan, a restaurant that I thought was haunted. And started the book really just to see if I could tell the story. Never had an eye for publication necessarily, just because I, knew what a long and daunting road it could be. I put that story down for several years. Talking over a decade. Dabbled in some other things, did a lot of freelance writing and editing and some ghost writing, and just found that those characters, I couldn't get them out of my mind. I actually dreamt about them at times, which was pretty cool. And so over a decade after I wrote the first paragraph, I decided to pick it back up and see what would happen, and completed it. Also, not with an eye for writing a trilogy. I wrote it as a standalone book, though I did leave it somewhat open-ended. I left a little hint of a possibility. I don't know if I did that on purpose or that was just the way I ended it. And then I got my agent in 2020, and she shopped it around widely. And we landed at Ronan Weatherford Publishers, and they like to work with multiples. So they asked if I would write a trilogy. And I instantly said yes without thinking through what that might entail. But it's, now I'm writing the third in the series, and it's been an interesting process, an interesting ride to get here.
I think, an open ending is extremely appropriate for a story about ghosts, because the end is not the end. And I like that it allowed you to expand in this way. So you said that this is the second book in the trilogy. Without spoiling anything, could you just tell us a little bit about the first book and where the beginning of the second book finds Josie, our protagonist?
Sure. Well, in the first book, she's really grappling with her ability. That's one of the big differences between books 1 and 2. And she is working in a restaurant, and she's single and dating the wrong men. And without giving anything away, by book 2, she's dating the right man, though it's certainly not smooth sailing. And she is not only working in a restaurant, she owns the restaurant. And so where book 1 has her, very reluctantly realizing that this ability that she had as a kid has come back, and it's daunting and it's uncomfortable until the end, when she realizes just what a purpose it serves, both for her and for the people in her life, or what a purpose it can serve. Book two, she's fully embraced that this is who she is, and or this is who she is now. Um, and here she's grappling with other people not being so amenable to her gift, and other people. The real conflict comes because her partner wants nothing to do with this. And then spirits start to come to her with urgent messages for the living, including her partner. So she has to figure out how to navigate having this gift in a world that doesn't always believe in it and doesn't always want to believe in it.
What drew you to telling stories about ghosts? I personally love ghosts. I love them when they're scary, when they're sad, when they are cathartic and life affirming.
Uh-huh.
What drew you to them?
What drew me? Um, a lifelong belief, or I don't know if I can say lifelong, but a long held belief. My sister and I think that the house that we grew up in had a spiritual presence in it, which is a nice way of saying was haunted. And, so I've always had this idea that there is something else out there. And then in 2004, that was around the time that mediums were kind of having a very public and celebrated heyday. There was, the Crossing Over with John Edwards was on television, and a lot of these other kind of celebrity mediums were starting to crop up. I went to my first non-celebrity medium in 2004 and had the most just striking experience. This was early days of, we weren't even calling it social media. If you had Googled me, you wouldn't have found a connection to any of the people who came through. And the people who came through did so with such specific information that this man was able to convey to me that I was hooked. It would have been really hard to be a skeptic at that point. And I was just really interested because for me, it was very comforting. I was raised without a religion. I was raised without a foundation of, what comes after. And this sort of connected some of those dots for me. And the catharsis and comfort that I found through it was really what drew me to exploring how this could work. And, I have a little bit of an ability to sense energy, but I'm certainly no Josie. And I was interested in exploring what it would be like to have a character who just had this, and it's not even a question, and it's just a part of her, like any one of like her primary five senses. This is just part of who she is, and so it was the idea of this belief, or in her case, this knowledge, being a way to address grief. The grieving process is something I've always been very attuned to and interested in because it's the most individual and universal experience that we have. I'm glad you called it a warm hug, and I want it to feel comforting and hopeful.
It does feel very comforting and hopeful. And I think what's so interesting to me as sort of like grief as a trigger for like a heightening of this sensibility or this
Mhm.
power, because grief, like, even though it's overwhelming and difficult and exhausting and all the things that it is, it's also just, it feels very powerful and almost
Yes.
sacred when you are experiencing it. So I feel like it makes sense that it would heighten your both your senses and your connection to the
Mhm.
world, even as you're feeling so intense.
It's so interesting that you say your connection to the world, because the first time I really experienced it, as it is all of those things. It's it can be horrible and traumatic and exhausting. That's a really astute observation. But I felt more anchored to the world somehow. To this shared experience. This club I always knew I would join and never wanted to, but it's inevitable. And so yeah, I think it can bring about all of a sharpening of all of those senses, and certainly memory plays a role in grief. And I lost my father last summer. I went to that same medium I'd seen in 2004. I went back to him too soon, yet my father came through, and it was this intensely powerful experience. This guy I would recommend, I just recommended him to a friend, and she had the most incredible experience with him, like timely and everything. His name is Philip Quinn. He's in Connecticut, but works via Zoom. Uh, and he's great. And I've been very fortunate that I've spoken with a lot of really great mediums, and some where I didn't connect so much, or the messages that came through didn't seem all that um, relevant or uncanny, which they can.
That makes sense, because there are good accountants and bad accountants. So there
Exactly.
are,
That's what I always say. There
yeah.
in any field, there are the people who excel and the people who maybe aren't so great, and the people who are faking it.
Yeah.
It's so this is, if you think of spiritual mediumship as, a field, you're gonna run the gamut of experiences with the people who practice.
So at the restaurant, Josie sets a ghost table, as is indicated in the
Mhm.
trilogy title. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about this tradition and its connection to New Orleans, which I know you also have a
Sure.
deep affinity for.
Yeah, I do. Book one, part of it takes place in New Orleans, and the third book that I'm currently writing, part of it will take place. The carryover in book two is at the restaurant in the Book of Reservations. The restaurant is New Orleans themed, and a New Orleans menu, and the chef is from New Orleans, and it's a place that means as much to Josie as it does to me, maybe even more so because it's a connection to her beloved grandmother, who she lost right before the trilogy began. So on one of my visits down there in about, I want to say 2009, a friend brought me to the restaurant Muriel's in Jackson Square. And that building is haunted. Anybody who works there will tell you they have their resident ghost, Antoine, who had that as his private home, and who, this was in the 1800s, he lost it he bet it in a poker game and lost it, and it was like his dream home. So the night before he was to move out, he went upstairs and took his own life, and he's apparently still hanging around there, no pun intended. But he you know everybody I've spoken with who works there has an Antoine story, and they'll just say, oh yeah, he's this, iridescent orb that just shimmers through sometimes, or he'll rearrange the bottles, or he'll throw glasses every now and then. He's this mischievous spirit, and they set a table every night for him, their ghost table. And I just thought that was such a, well, for him, and a date. Um, I just thought that was such a beautiful concept, such a way of, and in New Orleans, it's not even questioned. Everybody has a ghost story, and everybody, even if you don't believe, plenty of people who do. Um, and I loved that idea that for one, they're okay. Well, yeah, he may break glasses, but we're stuck with him, so we might as well honor him and set this table. It's a way to honor him. It's a way to live with him, and I just loved that idea. So I brought that into the Book of Reservations, as a way for Josie to honor the people whom she's loved and lost. So she sets tables every night, or places are set every night for her grandmother, and another character's brother, and a neighborhood regular who used to, who was a big part of book one, and then three people who died in the restaurant decades before Josie ever worked there, but who she has a connection to. And it's a way for her to honor them. It's a way for her sometimes to see them, and to communicate with them. And, it's one of her sanctuaries, a place to really meditate on everything that's going on, and on grief and ghosts, and whatever is coming up in her life in the moment. So it's a sacred spot.
And it becomes sort of the focal point of the tension between Josie and her partner.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love if you could talk a little bit about developing that dynamic, because I think that, oftentimes when we think of like a believer skeptic dynamic, we think of something like Mulder and Scully, where it's like they're sassy and they're
Mm-hmm.
flirting about it, and it's like fun. But like this is an actual, it's a deep-rooted difference and source of tension in their
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah. I guess we can name the partner.
Yeah,
I've been
sorry.
avoiding it because I didn't. No, I did that first. I didn't want to give any spoilers to the code check girl. But so Josie's partner is Derek, and he is he's saddled with this rational mind, this pragmatism, where she's this. I mean, even before her abilities came into focus, she was this sort of dreamy optimist, and he gets his information from the New York Times. She gets this is back in 2000, when news was a little bit different. But so anyway, he gets his information from the Times. She gets her information from her departed loved ones. And it's this major difference between them. And he comes to sort of resent her ability because he sees it as her spending time, not just with people that aren't him, but with entities, that with this whole world that he's not at all tapped into. And at the same time, her frustration is that she has this very clear message that she has to impart to him, but he doesn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't want to hear about it. And I've certainly had skeptics and non-believers in my life. My husband accepts and believes but doesn't want to dabble. He doesn't think I'm nuts when I talk to mediums or when I write about these things. But I was just interested in what would happen if you had this fundamental difference in belief systems. And I wonder about that in a much more grounded way too, couples who have fundamental differences in beliefs and how they make it work. Things are so polarized now, and I know couples who are on both poles and to somehow make it work. And I just find that dynamic interesting and rich to be mined for stories. So, what I left open-ended in book one was the idea that maybe he'll come around to believe or to accept, and he kind of has no choice but to do so in book two, but it is very hard earned on Josie's part.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that develop. And I think it makes for there's an emotional realism to the story, that grounds the supernatural elements and gives them emotional weight. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I mean, that's important to me because, because I know there are a lot of disbelievers, and I completely understand, and I believe with a grain of salt or an asterisk. I believe because I want to believe, and I have had these really profound experiences, but it was always important to me that this not be a ghost story, but it be a story that's grounded, that happens to have ghosts in it. Mm-hmm. And that explores, not everybody in the book is in tuned with them. Most people aren't attuned, but so that was really important. And Josie is a grounded person in a lot of ways. This is just, like I said before, this is just part of her existence, and what can she do about it? These ghosts are reaching out to her, these spirits are reaching out to her because they need to, and she's their conduit to get messages to the living. And so as has been explained to me by mediums I've spoken with, that's her responsibility. That the mediums I've spoken with feel it's their responsibility. They have this gift. This is, one of their purposes in life is to use it, and use it responsibly.
So I know that, you don't want to tell us too much about book three, but could you tell us anything about what is in store for the conclusion of this trilogy? I am so excited to see where it goes.
I can tell you that it takes place in winter of 2003, January of 2003. So we've very intentionally jumped over 9/11. But 9/11 is still informing what's going on. And Josie's spiritual abilities were profoundly shaken up because of the events of 9/11. So she's in each of these books, she's in a very different phase with her abilities. And well, I mean, how book two ended. So there's a continuation of a story that I planted at the very end of book two. She's just in a very different place. New York and the world are in very different places. The restaurant is doing well. Many of the same characters will come through, but not all of them. And that was the reality of being in New York at that time, was that not everybody who was in New York on September 10th, 2001, a lot of people obviously perished, but a lot of people also left the city after that. And people I knew left the city. So a lot of the neighborhood regulars are, living upstate or living elsewhere. I know someone who moved to Iowa from New York City after 9/11. So it's reflective of what it was like and how some people are still, in January of 2003, some people were still feeling as though this happened yesterday. Other people had moved on. And that's hard for Josie because she's having, for obvious reasons, she's having a really hard time just moving on and viewing this in the rearview mirror, as most of us, or many of us, did that soon after. So it doesn't get bogged down in 9/11, but 9/11 certainly informs the storyline.
That's fascinating. And, you're one thing that we haven't talked about yet is how grounded in New York these stories are. And with it coming to 2003, it's like it's approached now the years that I lived in the city. I was there from
Okay.
2001 to 2005 as a college student. So much of the setting, has felt really familiar to me in the books and being
good.
Village. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to see where this goes. Thanks so much for coming and sharing your book with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Listeners, you can check out the Book of Reservations, although you should check out Coat Check Girl first if you are so inclined. They are available now. They will be available when you hear this. Do you have a bookstore or a website or anything that you like to send people to for books?
I do. I like to send people to bookshop.org, which is my online book retailer of choice. They donate a percentage of all sales to independent bookstores. You can choose your favorite independent bookstore or they'll pick one for you. It takes a little bit longer than Amazon, but not much. And it's just, buying books for a good cause and keeping print and independent bookstores alive. So bookshop.org.
Yes, I love to hear that. They're a perennial favorite over here. So all right, listeners, you have your assignment. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.